going to get some more views on securities, markets, infrastructures, and joining us we have an esteemed panel of guests. Nice to have you all with us. Let me introduce you to who they all are. Dominic Hobson is Editor-in-Chief of Global Custodian Magazine. Also with us, Andrew Gray, Managing Director of the DTCC. Goran Fors is the Global Head of GTS Banks and Financial Institution at SEB. Swift Board Member and Chairman of the Board of Securities. And Diana Chan is the CEO of the European Central Counterparty Limited. Nice to have you all with us. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with you, Dominic, first of all. You just came from that big issue debate which you were moderating, I understand. Tell us for all of us, I should say, what were some of the big highlights for you out of that session?
Well, I think what we talked about during the session which I was part of was the narrowing gap between costs and revenues. What's driving up costs is mainly regulation. What's driving down revenues is mainly falling transaction volumes. And so the banks find themselves in a rather difficult place, a rock and a hard place.
Banks between a rock and a hard place. What do you guys want to say about that?
Well, I think that post the crisis and with all of the regulations that Dominic just mentioned, the banks are having a hard time dealing with that. We ourselves as a leading market infrastructure are responding to those regulations. We are making sure that we are very solid with respect to risk management. We're revamping our technology platforms on the one hand, strengthening our core, making sure we're able to continue to provide the level of service that people expect from a core institution such as ourselves. But at the same time, I think there are opportunities for us to figure out how to leverage that core infrastructure to be able to meet the needs of our clients, to help them reduce their costs, which is what a utility does, as well as to improve transparency, which is another topic that came up yesterday. And to the extent that we can facilitate the gathering of information that regulators can find useful to be able to understand what's going on, we think that that will help in terms of being able to manage risk going forward.
I might say, and I think Andrew would forgive me for saying this, that part of that hard place is the feeling that the infrastructure is no longer a utility used by banks, but is actually becoming a competitor to the banks. And indeed maybe transferring risk from banks back to these new entities called CCPs.
Well, Goran, you're a banker. Tell us what you think of what you've been hearing so far.
Well, I didn't hear everything that Dominic said just now, but it's definitely a challenge having on being a banking in the transaction banking side at the moment. The revenues are not increasing in a good way, and the cost situation is that we still continue to see decreasing costs. We need to work with the cost situation, and we need to get that down. So it's of course challenging. We have the regulatory initiatives which also costing us a lot in development, and we have to adjust to that. So of course, being in the intermediary business, especially on securities, is going to be a pretty bad challenge for us, especially in Europe, I would say, where it's really, really going to be tough. And the consolidation will continue and competitors will turn up. So.
Well, Diana, Europe is a challenge, as we've just heard. Tell us what you see from where you sit as a CEO of European Central Counterparty in Europe.
Well, market infrastructures are essentially a fixed cost business. There needs to be tremendous economies of scale in order to deliver a low unit cost to users. Our challenge is how to do that while doing new things that we need to do to make the environment safer.
Yeah.
Nothing really comes for free, and safety comes at a cost as well. So what we need to do is to make sure that we continue to deliver quality service, make the services safer, and in the meantime keep prices as low as possible, because all our customers are challenged right now.
Are we actually safer? I mean, we've been having this discussion about CCPs and wondering if we are actually safer with all the regulation or not.
The regulations are very useful because they set minimum standards of safety which were not there before. I think if we achieve that, then we would really have achieved something.
Well, I think one of the questions we discussed was whether we've actually transferred the too big to fail problem from the banks to the CCPs that Diana and others run. And the regulators haven't thought through sufficiently far what the consequences of that concentration of risk are. There's no plan, for example, to wind down a failed CCP. There's no plan to wind down a failed CSD.
CSD, yeah. What do you think about that?
I think we're definitely mitigating and changing the risk climate, and that's going to be continued. But it's dangerous to say that we are taking away risk completely, that as someone feels that, for example, with the CCP environment, we still are in a risky environment, and that's going to continue being like that. And you have to realize that, especially in the bank side, we do assume a lot of risk on behalf of clients, and we're expected to do that even more going forward.
While I do think that you can obviously not eliminate risk, I do think that CCPs have demonstrated that they can play a role in minimizing the impact of crises and defaults, and I think that role will continue. That having been said, we're spending a lot of time working with our participants to think about scenarios that we may not have thought about before, the so-called black swan scenarios, and some of that has been prompted by what's happened in the crisis and also more recent events such as Knight Capital, right? People never expected this kind of a situation. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about, well, what could happen that we may perhaps not have thought about before, number one. Number two, with respect to resolution and recovery, that's definitely something that we're working on. It's a requirement, and just as the banks have done it on their side, we need to, on the infrastructure side, do the same thing.
Another known unknown risk which these new entities might create is their impact on the wider collateral market, because they're going to be big eaters of all forms of central bank eligible collateral, so they're going to in effect repackage risk from banks.
Collateral arbitrage.
Yeah. Well, it'll have some effect on the, it's not a collateral arbitrage, it's going to be an impact on liquidity in the collateral markets, because they're going to be sucking in this collateral, they're going to be immobilizing it, and it's going to make the price of collateral highly volatile over the next 5 to 10 years.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think there has been a lot of discussion about collateral and the need for more collateral. I think some of the figures that have been tossed around have been, there's $1 trillion shortage.
22 trillion was the highest I saw.
Right, in collateral. And it's an issue that the banks are working through, that we're working through with the banks as well. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's something that we're very focused on.
Yeah, especially in the collateral side, the products and the services around that will, the needs for that will increase, and that's also something that, if you come back to my role in SWIFT, that we are now also working on to see what we can assist the industry on the collateral side.
I think that demand for more collateral will generate more innovation in that space. And I really expect to have a lot of service providers coming up with new solutions so that people could transform collateral into the right quality, collateral could be moved about more efficiently, and that there would be an overall lower cost of doing business despite the additional requirements.
I think Diana is right. I mean, collateral is going to be the main form of access to liquidity, and so there's a big opportunity for the banks in managing the collateral of their clients much more efficiently. Now, whether all of that innovation will be a good thing, or whether it turns junk collateral into eligible collateral, remains to be seen.
Paint a picture for me, because things are moving quite rapidly, aren't they, with the regulation, the technology, hopefully some of the innovation that we're going to see. What do you think this space is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
I can tell you what I think I'd like it to look like. I think I'd like it to be more competitive, more fragmented, rather than less fragmented. What I think it will look like, actually, is a lot less competitive and a lot more consolidated. In other words, we're going to have fewer pools of concentrated risk around the world as a result of shifting this risk from the banking system into the infrastructure system, if you like.
On the cost side, we're engaged quite actively with our clients to talk about ways in which we can help reduce their cost pressures. And I think we're seeing that functions that once were considered to be a competitive advantage are no longer viewed that way. And our clients are looking for ways to utilize those functions. And I think what you're going to see, based on what we've heard so far from our clients, is actually more of those functions being transferred to utilities, which will ultimately, I think, result in efficiencies as a result of scale.
Short term, I think we might see the further fragmentation and the development of more alternatives. But in not that far, not long in the future, we will see consolidation in most of the areas. CCP's bank side for the intermediary side, CSD side as well. So there will be, but for the short term, it will be a bit of a fragmented environment with competition.
Yes, and I think what will result the institutions that are the more flexible, the more nimble, innovative, will be the ones that will continue to serve the market.